Good to go.
Okay. Okay, welcome to weha.com's weekly roundtable. I'm John Lyons, joined by the managing editor of weha.com, Ronnie Newton. Tonight we have two guests who were integral in the passage of some of the most important town legislation to be passed in decades. For years, future pension obligations for West Hartford have been an albatross to the budgeting process. West Hartford faced an uncapped and uncontrolled potential out-of-control pension cost over many years. The potential was for this to wreak havoc on the budget and result in higher taxes for the community, drive away business and industry, as well as lower the standard of living for town residents. Legislation passed this week by the town council will control pension obligation expenses, create a protected reserve fund, fully fund pension obligations going forward, and result in more manageable budgeting process for future councils. Tonight, we welcome the architects of this plan, Mayor Sherry Cantor and Town Manager Matt Hart. Thank you both for coming on. How are you?
Thank you, John. Good. How are you?
Doing great. Thank you for having us.
We gave you the big introduction. Now you got to live up to it. So, Matt, why don't we start with you, because we have a lot of questions for Sherry regarding budget and policy later on in the show. So we're gonna pick on you here a little bit. Tell us a little bit about, first of all, what is it? Let's start with the building block. What's a pension obligation bond, and what does it do?
All right. Thank you, John. And thank you so much for having us on this evening. So a pension obligation bond, it's a debt instrument that can be issued by a municipality, a county, or a state government. And it is a commitment. It's not issued by the pension board per se, and sometimes that's a confusing point for people. It is a commitment. It's a firm commitment that the municipal or state government is making.
So where
it is?
Okay, go ahead.
It's a taxable instrument,
yep,
as opposed to a tax-exempt general obligation bond, which is the most typical type of debt we issue.
So why go with a taxable instrument when you could have gone to a tax-exempt instrument, number one, and where does the money come from? Who is buying the bonds?
So we could not issue a standard general obligation bond for this purpose. You know, this process is controlled by state statute, and this is the only type of bond we could issue to fund the pension in this manner. So there's a market of entities out there that will look to purchase this at a competitive rate. You know, municipal bonds of all types, general obligation bonds, as well as taxable bonds, you know, they're very desirable instruments because we're a very secure creditor. You know, they know where we are. They know we're going to pay. So there's a pretty significant market nationwide and internationally available for instruments like this.
So I guess let's go back. Let's back up. Mayor Cantor, we'll head over to you. I mean, you mentioned this initiative of yours to me probably 5 years ago. I know it's been on your radar. What got us into the situation that you decided to take the town in this direction? What caused it?
Well, I chaired the Finance and Budget Committee for the last 15 years. And so I know all the elements of the budget and what drives the budget and what the challenges the town was facing each and every budget, and then looking into the future and what those costs were going to do. Some you can see and some you can't see. And for the pensions, we saw a pattern of this, the ADAC, the actually determined employer contribution, going up every year. And we weren't really making progress on our funded ratio. And as we started to look at the funded ratio and we sliced it and cut it, and I feel like we really did that cross section of, okay, what's in this thing? And we did change benefits from 2006 on. That's been a continual process where we've negotiated changes. So the normal cost, the cost of current employees in the future, those costs have gone down. But the past service cost, which is the cost of employees that have long retired or employees that are still employed but are under contracts that they've had for 10, 20, 30 years that are older than 10 years, actually. They're in that past service cost bucket. And that bucket, thank goodness people are living really long lives. As Ronnie and I know, we have elderly parents that, I'm sure when their employers develop their retirement plans, they never expected those employees to live so long. So, so lots of reasons why that past service cost has continued to grow. The reality is it's really put a ton of pressure on our budget year after year after year. And I said this, in 2003, the contribution to the pension plan was $1.3 million. Today, it's $27 million. So the rate of growth on that, and it's not like, okay, now we're topped out and now we're going to start going down. We're 41% funded, under 41% funded, and those costs continue to go up. And we were projecting costs before mortality tables changed again, as the actuaries advised us to do, because we're very upfront and want accurate information. We were projecting numbers that were really rising at a pretty rapid rate, and there were annual contributions approaching over $50 million that we projected. So we have to do something. I shouldn't say we had to do something. We wanted to do something to prevent this from being an increasingly stressful situation for the finances of West Hartford.
So has West Hartford been paying into its pension plan all along? Like how did this volume or this level of unfunded liability accumulate?
So I have payments going back to the mid 80s. I have a record of we were making payment contributions, the employer contributions. At that time, it was called the ARC, annual required contributions, and that ARC was about $1 million. And then in 1988 or 9, it was $200,000. And then West Hartford, in the 90s, as some of us remember, there were double-digit inflation and returns. The returns were, it was a high inflation, 17% returns. And it was really a very unique time. And a lot of pension plans became overfunded. Many plans knew that wouldn't continue. I don't know why West Hartford did not make payments, but they didn't. They were over 100% funded and for the past service costs, and no payments went into the plan for 12 years. And that really, just think about a savings account that you think of a kid's college account that you put money in, and then you're making, the market goes crazy and you're making great returns, and you doubled your money, you tripled your money. And then, the college comes and you're pulling out that money for kid 1, year 1, and then kid 2, year 2, and then kid 3. And then the second kid comes along and you put nothing in, money's not going to be there. So that's kind of what happened. And at the point where interest rates started to modulate a little bit, it was clear that contributions were needed. And but it did permanent damage to the health of the plan. And I'm sure if the councils in those days had updated mortality tables and knew what was coming, they would have handled things differently, but they didn't know. And we have much better modeling abilities now, so much better, of running so many different scenarios. I don't know about you, but I remember those computer cards. The modeling were just not, it just wasn't as easy to do the analysis that we've been able to do and the stress tests we've been able to do on this pension and looking forward.
And we weren't the only municipality to make that mistake either. It was, unfortunately, when pension plans, when they were over 100% funded, when they rose to 110, 120, 130, what have you, it was hard for legislative bodies, and sometimes even folks in my position, not saying that that's what happened here, but to look at a pension holiday in order to provide tax relief or in order to help resolve a collective bargaining agreement. And those are things you can't do. As as the mayor said, because the ripple effects, the downstream effects are very, very significant.
So let's try to provide a visual, A and B, if you can. Let's first, and Matt, I'll direct this question at you. Let's say this legislation had not been offered or not been passed. Nothing was done. What would have happened? When would it have happened? And would there have ever been a downside on the back end where these crazy increases in the budget started to decrease?
Yes. So, the path we could have continued on is the path we've been following for the past decade or so, where we continue to make that ADAC payment. We continue to negotiate changes to the pension plan design, but the real liabilities here, as the mayor talked about at the beginning, are the unfunded liabilities, the past service costs. So our ADAC would have continued to increase on an annual basis far in excess of the rate of inflation. It's approaching 30 million now. It would have gotten to 35 million, 40 million, 50 million within 20, 25 years. I think at between 25 and 30 years, it would then eventually start going in the opposite direction.
Okay, so let's talk about
for decades, we would face this cost escalation.
Okay.
So as long as those people continue to live, is that kind of the way to look at it?
The legacy employees?
It's not just tied to mortality. That's a part of it. It's having to catch up to that unfunded liability. That's the big driver.
So now the legislation has passed. We're going to move forward with the bond offering. So now walk us through what happens.
Okay, so what will happen now is we still have some steps to complete on our end. We have to make a referral to the state, to the treasurer's office, and to a section of OPM, the Office of Policy and Management. They need to review all of our plans and provide us with comments, which we'll take into due consideration. Assuming that all goes fine, we'll go to market this spring. We'll sell the bonds in the March, April timeframe. The bond proceeds themselves will be deposited into the pension trust, and the pension board, with the advice of our pension advisor, is going to be very careful to manage the investments using a dollar cost averaging method to really to spread the risk over a period of time. But what we're going to have going forward is we will have a fixed payment. Our estimate right now is about 22.9 million. A fixed payment that represents the payment we need to make each and every year on the bonds themselves. And that will be a fixed payment for 25 years. On top of that, we are going to have a much smaller ADAC payment. We're still going to have an ADAC payment for all the current employees to cover the normal cost, plus a little bit more. That ADAC payment is going to range from 7 to 12 million. So our costs moving forward are going to be, roughly 29 million. They may get to approaching 33, 35 million, depending on where that ADAC goes. But it'll be much lower and much more manageable than approaching 40 million or 50 million.
So and this was one of the questions I had watching the hearing the other night. It was about the variability of the ADAC. The variability is tied only to existing employees, not, and I'm going to use the term legacy, meaning people who are under the old plans that are causing these, that caused the underfunding to begin with.
Yeah, it's not exactly that clean. The ADAC is limited to the normal cost plus the what we have funded thus far, the percentage of the funded liability. But we can only use the pension bonds under state statute. They only cover the unfunded liability. It's limited to just that.
And so our forecasting is showing in 25 years, that liability will be behind us and we'll only be paying ADAC on current retirees, current employees.
Correct.
Okay. So what do you know what that means to the budget in 30 years? I mean, one of the things I'm so impressed about with this plan is how forward-looking it is. I've met few politicians who are forward-looking. In fact, some today are backward-looking in my book. And this is such a forward-looking plan. I've never seen anything like it. So, and Mayor Cantor is not thinking about, the municipals this year, the municipals in 2 years. She's thinking about the elections that are going to be happening in 2032 and 2034 and the town at that time. Where is the town going to be in 30 years? We ostensibly we've paid off the bonds. Hopefully we've managed things well. We haven't talked about the safety fund, but we've got a good chunk of money hopefully sitting in that fund that's being created, which I'll get into in a minute. Where's the town going to stand at that point, Matt? Have you run models that far out?
Yes, our actuary has, and there's a whole series of them, but one which we think represents a number of scenarios. What I'm seeing here in the year 2046 is that we would be looking at a payment. 2047, we would be looking at a payment of roughly 10 million on that ADAC payment.
In today's dollars.
Correct.
That's incredible.
And at the end of that period, and you're going to talk about it, but the most unique aspect of this financial arrangement is that we are establishing a pension reserve fund that is going to protect volatility, but we do believe can offset future pension payments for a number of years. And so we are, I think, giving our future councils, your daughter, John, when she's mayor,
Yes.
will potentially be able to decrease. Can you imagine? I mean, really, the pressures on the budget will be so much more manageable from this at that time. Who knows what the other, the other demands on the budget will be. But from this, we have, provided a level strategic plan to deal with an issue that really has put a lot of stress on our budget over the years.
Yeah, if I could elaborate on the mayor's comments there, I think the reserve fund was a real game changer here, coming up with that idea. Because one of the concerns with issuing pension obligation bonds is what if a change in market conditions really drives up that remaining ADAC that you're still going to have on an annual basis. So we're going to
let me interrupt
go ahead.
so viewers can relate, because even I'm having trouble wrapping a game changer. What could impact it is a cure for cancer. Is that correct? Something that's going to significantly increase lifespan. Am I understanding that right?
No, I was talking more about market volatility.
Oh, you're talking
Like if
about
the economy falls apart.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
I'll come back to that point then.
So this is a level of insurance, if you will.
Okay.
So the 27, roughly the 27 million we would plan to contribute, that we would plan to pay in the form of the ADAC payment next year, we're instead going to deposit that into this pension bond reserve fund. And that was created in the form of an ordinance with some real protections. It can only be utilized to pay increases, annual ADAC increases in excess of 5% or more. So let's say 10 years down the road, we're looking at a 7% increase in our annual ADAC payment. The town will need to pay the first 5, that remaining 2% we can draw from this fund. We also, if we're at a point in which the plan is 100% funded and our actuary does an analysis that demonstrates that in 90% of the outcomes we're going to remain at roughly 100%, we can also use the reserve fund to pay for a portion of the debt service on the bonds. But the primary purpose of it will be to absorb increases in the ADAC payment should they arise. And we fully expect that we'll need to draw on it from time to time over the 25-year period. But as the mayor was talking about, at the end of that 25 years, we expect to have a balance of 60, maybe to 100 million that can be utilized for other purposes, for other liabilities that the town is facing at that point.
So it's,
And,
it's
and that
effectively,
fee, that account is not tied to anything at that point, right? In 30 years from
Correct.
now, that money is available for other uses.
Correct.
okay. So back to my, just trying to help me and viewers understand ADAC and the variability in ADAC. What impacts ADAC could be a change in life expectancy, a major medical breakthrough, something that's going to create additional expense due to longer life, that type of thing. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, also plan design, depending on what changes we make to the pension plan in the future, that would impact it as well.
Yeah, there's some,
The
yeah.
benefit levels.
Okay.
Salaries will impact it as well, because to a large extent, pension benefits are linked to salaries and compensation.
All right, Ronnie, sorry, I've been running with all the questions.
No. I've spent a couple of years studying this. Really, I talked to Sherry and Matt about it. I don't know, it was 2 years ago at least. So it took me that many years to really feel like I have a good understanding of this. But so here's a question: why haven't other towns done this? West Hartford's really the first one to come up with this type of a plan, aren't we?
Well, we're in a unique position, being a AAA bond rated community, being able to borrow at a lower rate than many communities can borrow, and being underfunded. So to have those two dynamics, a lot of communities don't have those two elements. Either they're lower rated and they have a higher underfunded, or they're better funded and they don't need to borrow money to make ends meet, or wouldn't necessarily look, not should take ends meet, to level out the payments going forward, and they don't have those escalating payments that we do. So, but I do think a lot of municipal plans and state plans have not updated necessarily their mortality tables or their discount rates in the same way. I was just looking up the Pew Research Institute had just done a pretty extensive article about the fact that underfunded pensions are so understated, and it probably is a bit of the next fiscal cliff for the municipalities and state governments. So it's a problem, but I think this is it has some risk. So if you borrow very low, which we are at historic lows, and I think we are going to start, people are going to look at this. This could be a white paper. And I do think there are municipalities going to use these tools that we are using to help to manage these plans going forward. So historically low interest rates are unique right now. They've been low, but this just really makes it work. That's number one. Number two, if you do want to either purchase an insurance plan, which many municipalities have to do, or you set up a reserve like this, it can minimize your risk. So those are good options that I think going forward. Many have to buy insurance plans, but it makes it too exorbitantly expensive that it doesn't work. But we are hearing about towns calling actually to ask, how'd you do this? What are you doing? Or other municipalities are starting to look at doing it, and things don't line up the way they do for us. The fact that we have the 25% of 25-year amortization, we're not extending that amortization. We're sticking with 25 years. That's another thing that some municipalities might not do. If they have 10 years left, or if they have it's not going to be beneficial to them to change that period, make it shorter. So anyway,
that AAA rating is a powerful tool if used properly. Okay.
Yeah, if I could add one thing on that, John, just in addition, and the mayor touched on this, the interest rate environment, it's probably once in a lifetime, what we're looking at now. When we did a pretty complete analysis 2 years ago, I think, and the rates weren't there. We would see savings, but not nearly as powerful, and most of the impact was a couple of decades out. So what we're seeing now, again, it's once in a generation, once in a couple of generations. It's really this opportunity. And as the mayor said, many AAA communities, their funded ratio is not where ours is, although there are some around the state, and actually we're starting to get some inquiries from other AAA rated communities in Connecticut, very well known in the greater Hartford region and other parts of the state. Their funded ratios may be 50, 60, 65%, but they're looking at this too, given this interest rate environment.
It's a tremendous tool. Now, it passed, both measures passed 7-2. Lee Gold, who's the minority leader, voted in favor. The other two minority members voted against. Both of them brought up the same concern. We're converting a soft debt into a hard debt. I didn't quite understand where they were coming from. I don't know a lot about bonds. Can you guys explain what's the difference? How does this turn a debt into a hard debt?
So the ADAC is a number that the actuary gives to the pension board, and the pension board approves it, and they send it to us, and we're required to make that payment. If we did not make that payment, we would not be a AAA bond rated community for long. Maybe they'd give us a year or two, but if we do that, we would lose that AAA bond rating, because they know what we saw in that 90s period. Historically low interest rates, we wouldn't be making it. Those were historically high interest rates, and we see the stress it put on that plan. So it is a way to kick the bucket down the road, short-term expedient, no tax increase, kind of immediate sugar high, I think. That ultimately will cost you down the road, not even equally. It will be exponential costs down the road. So that's a soft versus hard liability. And that's one of the things that you are required to make this payment. And that, as Matt had mentioned, the town is backing this payment. I mean, it's not just the pension fund, right? It's the town. So, and that's one of the reasons why we can get such a favorable rate. But it's really, you know what, it is a liability. It exists whether we put our head in the sand and say, we're going to take this, we're not going to pay it or not. It exists. And if we don't address it now, we're handing a real problem for the community down the road. I care too much about this community to do that. And it would not be. And we have been so diligent about making those in really hard years. 2008, we had to cut some positions.
Yep.
And we made our pension payment. And I just want to minimize that going forward, because, and this, I think, it has the plan to meet those elements of easing that stress, but meeting those really important obligations.
The full faith and credit of the town, of the community.
Correct.
So I'm a resident here. I believe in West Hartford. I want to invest in the community. Can a guy like me, can a resident, a citizen, buy West Hartford bonds? And how do they do that? Well,
with these bonds, go ahead, Matt. You can explain how that bond, when you go to market.
Well, we're going to have an underwriter with some number of bidders, so you need to follow the sale and connect through whoever you're using right now to utilize your investments. But we'll primarily see institutional investors in municipal bonds, including instruments like this. But there are ways in which individual investors can get involved as well.
I would never have thought about asking that question, John.
You know what? I believe in the markets. I'm a strong, people who know me know I'm a strong believer in the markets. Don't buy GameStop if you have it, solid. Yeah. But, there's my plug for that. But
Don't regret it.
Bonds are, exactly. Bonds are an amazing tool, and not a lot of people understand them. And to be able to invest in your community, I believe at a consumer level, it is triple tax free. It's at least on some level tax free. I don't want to get myself into trouble, but I certainly would, love to make an investment in the community. I'd, buy a bond or two. But anyway, so I thought I'd throw it out there. So talk to us about, I guess, Matt, while we have you, anything else relating to the bond offering, any other things to talk about on this issue?
No, again, I think it's just a very, very strategic move on the part of the town. And, I do want to credit the mayor for bringing this idea to us. And it was something we reviewed in a very careful and thorough manner. And I think it's innovative at the same time. As we've talked about at some length, we're taking advantage of the current climate, the current interest rate environment. And I'm really excited about the potential moving forward to alleviate some of the pressures we have on our operating budget. And we'd be happy to talk about that in more detail
And
later on in our show.
That's what I'm going to, unless Ronnie, you've got more POB questions. I'm going
Nope, that was a perfect segue.
Okay, perfect segue. So obviously, anytime we get Mary Cantor on, we always like to pick her brain on the budget. We like to know what's going on. I'll just ask broadly. I've got one or two line items I want to ask about because Mayor Cantor, you alluded to these things in the meeting the other night. But let's push pensions to the side. What's keeping you awake at night on the budget? What else do we have to worry about on the budget? How are we doing on the budget?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, we have several other cost drivers that continue to rise. We are a member of the Metropolitan District Commission, and there have been, we've had significant increases over the years. What the MDC is, I think, I can really put all your viewers to sleep, uses an ad valorem system for how they allocate their sewer charges. Most municipalities around the country, or most water systems around the country, use a user fee, but MDC is under a grandfathered arrangement and uses this ad valorem system, which is based on, ad valorem is generally based off of grand list. Their ad valorem system actually is based off of taxes collected. It's a little bit complicated over the last 3 years. And so we're part of this 8-member town, and we pay a good amount of more than we feel we would pay under a user system. But we get taxed, so we're one of the taxpayers, and we get taxed, and there's very little that we can do. NDC has been wonderful partner. They're they provide a great service for the town, and they are very professional. But it's been an expensive. It's been a real driver in our budget, and it's been unpredictable. We don't know until their budget comes how much we're going to increase, whether it's $300,000 or $800,000. And so we really tried to work with them to flatten out some of their own costs. Maybe this is a good vehicle for them too, to help alleviate some of their costs down the road and to stabilize some of the expenses that they have. But anyway, so that's been a real challenge. We also have an aging infrastructure. We know that. We have we have a lot of road repair. We have facilities that are aging, and we've got to address those things. And we continue to. Every year we do bond money, and you can buy those municipal bonds tax-free, John. Yep. But they are, there's a constant need, and we're not keeping up, with as much as we'd like to do. And then, obviously with COVID, we have revenues that have not come in at the same rate, whether it's parking revenue anyway, so there's stresses on municipal budgets, not just our municipality, all over the country. We have not, the country hasn't had an infrastructure investment in 50 years, and our municipalities show it. And we've had to actually handle the burden of things that municipalities didn't have to do before. And if you talk to the MDC, they would say the same thing. We used to get federal help for those major infrastructure improvements, and we don't now. And to have a property tax structure that handles multi-million-dollar improvements is really challenging. And how wonderfully diverse and the needs of all of our residents, and they are expansive. You can't do it when you're asked to do all of this too, keeping up with older schools, and the state has come down on their bonding too for school improvements. So it's this sort of this mix of all we have to handle. And again, using the property tax structure that Connecticut has, especially in Connecticut and Massachusetts and New Jersey probably being the top three, although we're up there now, I think, as two on property tax. We're asked to handle a lot under our property taxes, and it's just, I think there is going to have to be some change to that down the road.
Yeah, if I can just add to the mayor's very good overview. Looking at how we finance local government here in Connecticut, I think that's part of the challenge. So each and every year, our semi-fixed costs, they tend to increase faster than the rate of inflation. And generally, especially in a fully built out community like West Hartford, expenditures outpace the increase in property tax, the growth in the grand list. So what are some of the key drivers? We've talked about that already. The pension payment being a very significant one over the last decade or more. The mayor talked about the MDC, although we're both very grateful that next year we're not going to be looking at an increase in the tax that we need to pay to the MDC. And, we want to thank them for that for next year. Health insurance is something that typically rises much faster than the rate of inflation. The mayor mentioned infrastructure needs. That's something that does keep me up at night, thinking about stormwater. And then waste management is another thing that I was
going to hit on.
That's a big issue in Connecticut right now. So the property tax, one of the benefits of the property tax is it is stable. It's generally stable, especially in a community like ours. But the growth in the grand list generally doesn't quite keep pace with the growth in our fixed costs. So we're always looking at how we can better control those cost drivers, or find ways to grow the grand list in a sustainable way.
So
and the grand list, which was reduced, or which was released just today.
Okay.
I have not seen today, so I look forward to that. But let's talk about. I'm sorry.
It's breaking news.
Yes, it is breaking news. I'll look for Ronnie's story tomorrow on it. She'll be up till 2 a.m. writing it if I know her.
No, I already wrote it.
You already wrote it? Okay, maybe
right before
tonight,
this.
So, all right, let's talk about trash, because that's what I was alluding to, Mayor.
That's another driver.
When you brought it up in the meeting the other night. It's obviously a major budgetary concern. My understanding on the recycle side is we were being paid for recycles 10 years ago, and now we're paying a whole lot of money for recycle. So it's a problem on both ends, recycle and refuse. Is there a thought of going back to a private, taking it out of the town's hands, putting it back in the citizens' hands the way it was up until about 2006 or 7? Like, how are we going to deal with this?
Well,
and what's going on with it?
So our public works director, Matt, I'm sure will have more to say on this. He has been talking and singing this song for years now, that this is coming, and we better be open to thinking about how we handle this. So we have a contract right now with our tip fees. They're going up about maybe 20%. I think that's a little over 20, maybe 25%.
Would you call it a tip fee?
Tip fee, yeah, which is based on weight, and so we're paying $74 a ton, and it's going to go up to in the mid 90s.
Literally, what we're charged for tipping the truck into the waste stream.
Yeah, and again, recycle. We have obviously the transportation fee, but that's fairly steady. So, it can go up, but it's really the driver of that cost is the weight of the trash and the tipping fee that it costs to get rid of that trash. So we want to take things out of that solid waste stream as it continues to go up and up and up. There's an environmental reason, and then there's an economic reason. And then recycle, we used to be able to sell our recycles. And I think the last year we got a check, was a little check, but it was still a check. And now we have to pay in the tune of also $70-ish a ton for recycle. Recycle tends to be lighter material. It's not, glass isn't necessarily, but we are now paying a lot of money for our recycles. And it was a lot of the change driven by the China market and just the marketability of recycles. And so the whole state, our whole region actually is really in crisis. The Northeast, and I would probably the whole East Coast, but the Northeast especially, because we're a pretty dense area, and there's nowhere to put. There's very little way to get rid of trash, and the highest driver of weight we had yard waste was a driver, but the biggest is food. And so, how do we get food waste out of the stream? And that's the way we're going to really save money to take, and it will save money on the tip fees. I'm not sure it will save money on getting rid of the food waste, but it will at least stabilize and let us control. I have Blue Earth. I don't know if you know that. It's a subscription service that I get to compost, and I put in food scrap in there, and anything, he said, anything that grows can go in there. It was a West Hartford, a young man from West Hartford who, and Hartford, they partnered to develop this business. And many municipalities have this kind of a model. My kids in Boston have it, and my kids in Chicago have it. And you can get your compost then dropped back off. And you can, but this is kind of a way to get rid of some waste. Our brown bins, actually, you can put some food in that grows in those brown bins. You can't put meat in there and things, but you can put vegetables and fruit in those brown bins. So it helps, but we really, the state is working on having maybe some mandates and maybe some incentives, or maybe some resources to provide municipalities a way to deal with this waste. So there's been real leadership shown by the Commissioner of Katie Dykes, who happens to be a West Hartford resident, and she's doing some great work in bringing municipalities together. And this is every municipality, different sizes, different parties. Everybody has something to talk about and something to gain from changing the way we get rid of our solid waste and our recycles. So, Matt?
Yeah, there's one or two points I would add to that. Thank you, Mayor. And I also want to thank Commissioner Dykes for doing I think, a tremendous job in building this coalition and bringing it together, bringing people from across the state together. Small town first selectmen, big city mayors, et cetera, and really starting off with an education effort first and foremost. So as the mayor talked about, we're looking at ways in which we can reduce municipal solid waste. The acronym is MSW. Organic waste that's generally the heaviest thing, and that's what drives the cost there. How to separate that organic waste, how we can do more with recycling. But then another component is what's called extended producer responsibility, or EPR. Think about the things you buy, particularly through sources like Amazon, et cetera. Or actually, even when you go to a brick and mortar store, think about all the packaging that comes with the vast majority of items you purchase. That packaging has some real significant environmental impacts. So how can we better manage that? How can we reduce it? How can we make sure that more sustainable materials are utilized in that packaging? And how could we potentially place more of the burden on the producer of the product in terms of how we're going to handle and manage that part of the waste stream as well?
Good question.
And do you see that coming out of, maybe the new federal administration putting some more pressure on the manufacturers
or would it be state from Lamont's office, or?
I think it would be both, and I think that this is something of an international movement as well.
Interesting. So.
And countries that have done this have had great success. So, and the businesses want to cooperate. I mean, they'll do what they need to do. So you just, anyway, I think we'll see both. I think we'll see federal and state action.
It's complicated, and Mayor, when we get to the Q&A with you, I've got a question that kind of ties us all in a nice, neat bow, but I'm going to hold off on that here for a few minutes. So, so one thing, I did some quick analysis. It's not by any means, and Matt, you can certainly clean up my next statement, but it looks like, depending on what kind of home you own, whether it was new construction, whatever, between 2003 and 2016, taxes went up. And by the way, let me point out, this is prior to Mayor Cantor's administration. Taxes went up somewhere a minimum of 60%. I'm talking house taxes, home tax, homeowners taxes, and some houses seeing increases of over 100%. Since 2016 to today, they've gone up right around 5%, maybe a tad less. I guess the question is, what have you done to be able to, you've really been able to wrap your hands around taxes. I mean, it's a stark difference if you look at the numbers. And with this bond offering, are you able to look into the future and kind of give us a feel for how we should be able to control taxes going, say, the next 5 or 10 years?
This is for Matt?
It's for both of you, really.
Okay.
Would you like me to start off, Mayor?
Sure, go ahead, Matt.
Okay, great. So in terms of, I'm not as familiar with the history, John, so I don't know what drove the increases in the past. I'm sure some of it was due to increases in value. I would imagine that was a component of it. But we certainly have had these cost drivers, as we've been talking about, that have outpaced the rate of inflation to a significant degree. I think moving forward, obviously, a large majority of our fixed costs, whether it's employee compensation, what have you, we're going to continue to see increases. But how do we scale them down a little bit so that they're, a little bit more manageable? So, with the issuance of the pension obligation bonds, that'll go a long way towards controlling that liability to a significant degree, as we talked about earlier in our show. We're also doing some good things with employee health insurance. I expect we're going to have very good news on that in the coming months. We've got good news from the MDC for next fiscal year. Waste management, that will be a driver we are going to have to deal with, but hopefully, working with the state, we'll be able to realize some success there within a year or two. So I think that's going to be the continued game plan, is focusing on those half a dozen or so major cost drivers, and how can we bring the annual increases down to a more manageable level. Fortunately, West Hartford, and we've seen it this past year, even in the course of this pandemic, we remain such an extremely desirable community, especially as a residential community, and for businesses too. But home sales, I don't have handy statistics with me here tonight, but anecdotally, the real estate market is performing very, very well. And our homes are holding their values. We are in the midst of revaluation now. That will come out in October of 21. We'll be releasing that list. But what I think you'll see is that residential properties, and I think to a large extent commercial properties, will have held or gained in value, and that's a testament to the desirability of our community, the programs and services that we provide, and how we manage our financial affairs.
So, John, your question, there's so much to it, and it's so not simple. And actually, if you look at 2011 and most individual property tax, if you held everything the same with values, the taxes have not changed that much, actually. It's more like in the 10% range. In 10 years, if you think about what costs have gone up 1% a year. I mean, it's that doesn't happen that often. But the biggest driver of our budget is our schools. And so, that a lot has changed in education, and education is not easy. And it was very different when I went to Hall High School. We were number one in per pupil spending, and our mill rate was in the 70s.
Yep. Yes. I can show the chart if anybody wants to see it. I've got
right.
the chart.
People did pay a lot for, it was a big commitment. There were schools being built for every year for a number of years, and then there was a huge investment in the schools. So we are, I think you all know, education, the government has put less money into educating kids that flows down to us. And the state also has been strapped and hasn't been able to make, we get a percentage of what our ECS funding should be. If we were fully funded on ECS, as our formula would dictate, we would be paying a lot less. Our residents would be paying a lot less in taxes. I'm not saying we're different than anybody in Connecticut, but Connecticut spends less per pupil than all of our surrounding states. But we have a great education system. And if we let our education system slide, there go property values, and there go all of the things that sort of this house that we built, this tower that we built, and we build on each other. Public safety, we've had challenges that we haven't had before, with 2001 and then horrible, obviously with school shootings. There, we've had to respond in a way. Municipalities have had to invest in ways that we really didn't think we'd have to in the 70s and 80s and 90s, and all that went into, and I talked about those drivers. The pension has been a driver. MDC has been a driver. We've been more on top of them the last 5 years. So I think we've been, that's, helped to level those out. But for a while, I don't think we really understood why things were going the way they were. So, but there's a lot there, and I could
I'll
go
give you a
on
little data on the House front, because I checked with a friend of mine is the vice president of the Connecticut Realtors Association. We have under 45 houses not under contract for sale in the town of West Hartford. Typically, this time of year, the number is closer to 200. So there is something happening, and again, I think it's COVID driven. But we, a house goes on the market and it's selling in 3 days with 25 offers. So it's no question. It's been good for housing, and hopefully, ultimately, that's going to help our tax base as well. So Mayor Cantor, I'm going to wade into a kind of a sensitive area here with you, but I'm going to ask you a personal question. How many hours a week would you say you're mayoring for us? How many hours? Yes. How many hours are you?
Is that a new verb, mayoring?
Yes, I decided to invent a new word tonight. So.
Matt knows some.
It's a lot. It's a lot. She's all in, and then some.
I'm all in.
And I think, and look, on a personal note, I credit you. I mean, I see it. I have enough interaction with you that I truly see it. And I really think it's contributed to this community just getting better and better. And taxes, you're all over the budget. And I think that's a big reason why we haven't seen the tax increases. I talk about big ideas, and you and I have had this conversation about, I want to know what each counselor's big idea is. Ronnie and I talk about this, and I think so far it's been a great year for big ideas. Ben Winograd, who really, was the cornerstone of getting that accessory dwelling legislation passed. That passed. Obviously, we got the bond issue. We've got the pensions handled. You're working full time. One of my big ideas, and I've got a couple, and I want to talk about them both tonight. Number one is, how come or shouldn't counselors be paid even a stipend for serving their community? And hear me out before you tell me no. Number one, you guys work awfully hard. I talk to virtually all of you, and I know how hard you work and the time and effort you put into the community. But I feel that being a completely volunteer position, completely non-paid, could help. It could hurt some potential candidates, particularly minorities.
Absolutely.
And simply because minorities tend to be historically at the lower end of the income level. And I think we have a great council right now. This is not a shot at any single person on council, but I think if the counselors were to receive a stipend, if there was pay available, some sort of benefit structure available to them, I think it would, number one, broaden the pool of people who are active and in the process, which there's never enough of. And number two, if a counselor felt they were financially comfortable enough, they could elect to donate it back to the town. They could elect to donate their income to food share. But I think it's something that's worth talking about, and I think, frankly, you've earned this conversation.
Thank you. I mean, I
and we've had this conversation offline, I think, once or twice. But
yeah, we have, and of course, it's not right. I mean, I am an older woman. I have 4 grown children. They're all done with college. So I don't have the same financial constraints as I know when I was a town councilor. and I had 4 kids in school. And when I walked out the door to go to a night meeting, I knew they were having potato chips for dinner some nights. And, I had to make sure. My husband travels, and I had to make sure that they were taken care of. And luckily I had, a community that was so supportive. But a lot of, it's young people with kids can't do this schedule unless they are surrounded by support. And sometimes that costs money. But you're right. It discriminates. It discriminates against people that can't do it. And so you're absolutely right. And this is a charter change. It's something I've talked to our corporation council about it. It's something we're going to get to. It's probably a 2 or 3 year fix to deal with it. We're going to probably look at models. I was just on the phone with the Rochester, Minnesota mayor today. Actually, I was on several calls with mayors today. But the models are unique, and they're all different. And a lot of them have professional town management, but they also have paid councils, and there's some kind of stipend. Right now, it's really hard to vote for yourself getting something, and I don't.
It always is, I think.
I would be out the door, and I would either donate it or whatever. But a lot of people can't, and then it might make them feel like that less, whatever. And you don't want to get into that. So you want a structure that's going to be sustainable and makes sense, and is going to be open. And we've got to think about things differently on inclusion, because we're not going to be the best community we can be if we're locking people out, and that's true. So, and I have talked to a number of community members about this, and many of them want to serve, and I said, but there should be a stipend, and they're right.
It's tricky because this started in my mind a few years ago as I was getting more and more active politically, and somebody asked me, hey, do you know anybody who would be, interested in getting involved, interested in town council? And I had a conversation with a very good friend of mine, and they asked, oh, it's volunteer though, I can't afford to, because I know I'd want to give the time. But it really struck me. The person was a minority. I don't even want to say the gender, much less who it was. But it really struck me, because I think I stayed away from the word discriminatory, but it really is. And if somebody who's fortunate enough to have the income to be able to donate it back or give it to food share or do something good with the money, that God bless them. But so. Let's push that one. So, Ronnie, any questions? I got more questions here.
Well, so one thing, just real quick, and maybe it's something you can just talk about very briefly. The West Hartford Police West Hartford Police Department has recently formed a partnership with Interval House to kind of combat the. Oh, am I muted?
No, it was a bad. It sounded like a bad connection. It was like.
So West Hartford Police have formed a new partnership with Interval House. Can you talk a little bit about what that could mean for the town?
Yeah, so I think Matt probably wants to mention something about this too, but Interval House, as you know, is a domestic violence, a nonprofit focused on domestic violence, offers a hotline and support services for victims of domestic violence, and is very focused on prevention. That is the best way to handle any kind of domestic violence. So they have shelters, and they again have the hotline, and they do education programming, and they support. There's some other police departments that they have embedded advocates in. They know the system well. They have court advocates that go to court with victims to support them in this it's a very, very difficult process. And I brought this to Matt, and we had a meeting with the chief, and Mary Jane Foster, who's an incredibly talented leader, and our chief, who is also an incredibly talented leader and wants to make change things and make the town better. They have partnered, and they have an embedded advocate now that has started, as I think a couple of weeks ago, in our police department to work with victims, because the police do not have the training nor the time to follow up with a victim that's someone that's been in crisis and called the police. And the hope is they don't call the police again, they get support from the advocate and from the interval house. And we know the stresses of what's going on with the pandemic. It really makes it much more challenging. If somebody's susceptible to this, it puts them more at risk. So I'm very grateful for the town manager for being open to this and supporting it, and for Mary Jane, obviously, her services, and the chief has been such a leader and is really, and we're going to get a report on it at our next public safety meeting, and I'm excited to hear about that.
And
Unfortunately, we need it, but
we are up against it. Ronnie, one more question. We both know what the question is. Ronnie, do you want to ask it, or do you want me to ask the question?
No, you go ahead.
No, that's all right. So I got one more question. It's an easy one-word answer. This is for Mayor Sherry Cantor, and then I'll wrap up and thank both of you for coming on. Mayor, you're going to run again this year.
I'm thinking about it.
Well, I personally hope you keep thinking about it. So I think we're very lucky to have you. And Matt Hart, we're also very lucky to have you. Thank you for all the detail and the technical aspects of this. Really great to have you both on. This hour blew by. I looked up, I saw it was 6:59. I said, holy cow. But thank you all. Ronnie, as always, great show. Thank you very much. For weha.com, Weekly Roundtable, I'm John Lyons, and we will see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
And we've seen 10